Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is my lovely co-host, the chattering teacup.
Hello.
And here with us from North Carolina, Marjorie Hudson. Hello Marjorie and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, it's good to be here, Edith and Teacup.
It's good to have you here. We are here to talk about your book Indigo Field, which came out this year.
Yes.
And you promised us a reading to introduce your most important characters in the book.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to read from two different sections for the two main characters. So
Splendid.
I'll do that. So this is from part 1. Tucked between the Cedar River and the monstrous pines of the Gully Ridge lies an ancient field, tangled and wild, knee-high with last year's scrub, strewn with rocks the size of crouching men and sleeping deer. Its soil is deep and loamy. It has been planted, but never plowed. It is spring, and up on the ridge, a breeze lifts the broad crowns of the Gully pines, releasing yellow clouds of pollen that float across the highway and come to rest on every flat surface of Stonehaven Downs Retirement Village, including the hood of Colonel Randolph Jefferson Lee's new Honda Accord. West of the ridge, across Spill Creek, the breeze raises wild bees from the hollow heart of Miss Reba's sycamore. The bees rise up from that dark cove of sweetness, hover over 3 strange cedar statues in the yard, then head across the creek and through the woods. They pause over Jolene Blake's tidy fields, then glimmer up the Gully Ridge and gather among the old pines, humming. The Gully pines have lived through drought and flood. They know the glaze of ice and the glimmer of sun on their cracked, cupped bark, each scale like a small ear, alert for sound. The giant trunks sense the movements of vast oceans. They taste the breeze and know a storm will rise along the coast of Africa. They listen to the stories of the field. Colonel Randolph Jefferson Lee, retired Army, prepares for his daily run, which he's lied about for months, telling Anne he will stay in the neighborhood. He will call her on the cell if he gets in trouble, and he will keep it down to a stroll, a slow walk, no running. Rand glances guiltily at Anne sitting at the kitchen table, her fluffy, just-washed white blonde hair, her head tilted in that funny way of hers, peering through her fancy multicolor reading glasses at the paper. The lovebirds chatter in their cage next to the window. Anne's deep into her morning routine. Looking out the window now with pursed lips, something on her mind. He wonders sometimes if she thinks about Malaysia, their last posting, and all that happened there. But now she turns to the lovebirds in their cage, lifts the latch, and that mischievous grin, that morning joy is back. God, she's a beauty. How did he ever catch a woman like her? By pretending to be a man who belonged in a place like this. He slurps coffee, steals another look. Is she snubbing him after their dust-up last night? She asked him to come with her today to some crazy spring gala where all the ladies are supposed to wear sundresses and the men are supposed to wear straw hats. Croquet is involved, she said, or cricket. She wasn't sure which, and vodka-spiked lemonade, and it is all supposed to celebrate the first day of the Stonehaven Farmers Market. What does farming have to do with croquet? He'd asked her. It's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Don't be such a spoilsport, she said. I think it'll be fun. The social program here seems modeled after a summer camp for Southern debutantes. Tea and crumpets, balls and juleps. My God, last April, when they were still new here, before he'd figured out their game. They'd bust the newcomers down to some coastal plantation for a party with hoop skirts and a Rhett Butler look-alike. Rand stood, cringing in a corner, getting drunk as fast as possible. Anne ate it up, laughing, asking to see the elaborate pantaloons under those skirts, even dancing with the Rhett character, who was paunchy and 40-ish up close, and from what Rand could tell, knew only one dance step. The man led Anne in an endless backward circle till they were both dizzy and had to sit down. Rand avoided dancing, but he remembers a ridiculous twinge of jealousy about that Rhett character spending so much time holding his wife. Anne seemed to be enjoying that a bit much. To be fair, she had agreed later that having the black serving staff sing Dixie for them had been in terrible taste. Maybe they were being ironic, she said with her wry grin. God, I hope so. Since then, Rand has picked and chosen his social events carefully. These days, Anne goes to most of them alone, or with her new friends, Bess and George. So that's a little bit about the Colonel who starts the novel and his life in his retirement village. We can come back to that, but I want to skip to this other main character who lives across the highway, if I may.
Yes, please.
So this is from chapter 4, Friday afternoon across the highway and down Field Road. Miss Reba Jones is sitting on her porch, staring at the new green tops of the Gooley pines when she hears Reverend come flying down her gravel drive in his church van. The van scatters chickens, throws a cloud of dust. Miss Reba sees it on his face before he even gets out. Not a good day for justice. Reverend's come to tell her of Tommy J's trial, white man who killed her Danielle. 29 years old, sweetest girl there ever was, raised her from a child, nothing left of her now but ashes in a box and this lead weight on her heart. Reverend walks across the yard, gives the side eye to Papa's black angels looming over on him. Reverend is not a tall man, but he has made peace with what she knows he thinks are pagan idols. He knows they stand for grief, mostly, but just in case they have powers, he stands tall in his black suit and tie, chest out, standing up to the spirits, bigger than him. Her own rooster darts out now, flaps and rasps his warning. Reverend diverts the attack with a firm nudge of his shoe. Good afternoon, Miss Reba, Reverend calls out in his smoothest, kindest way. She indicates the porch chair and he sits, wipes sweat with his hanky. Hot this afternoon. She offers neither water nor tea. She hopes he doesn't stay long. They had ballistics this morning, Reverend says. Don't tell me ballistics, she says. She knows what a bullet does. His boy TJ was set to testify, but the child has run away, they said. They're still looking for him. Eyewitness, she says. Reverend nods. Our only chance, Miss Reba. She knows about eyewitness testimony. She knows about circumstantial. She's watched Matlock every episode, some of them twice. You can't get a murder conviction with circumstantial, not if it's a white man. So that introduces Miss Reba, who is kind of lives in a whole different world, just across the highway on the other side of Indigo Field.
Not so far away, and yet worlds apart.
Yes, worlds apart.
Yeah.
But I think also within the community, like Rand and his wife somehow seem to live in different worlds.
True. too.
Yes, yeah,
Absolutely.
really good point.
Yeah.
And I think people do that when they're separated from the place where they live. They can create bubbles around them, and truly, Rand and his wife are kind of living in different worlds right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And he takes the whole book to realize that he is indeed home. He's home in a
Yes,
way.
yes, and I do something a little different. I delve into backstory a lot because the book is about history and how we best not ignore it. And history, of course, is the backstory, the emotional story of any place, any nation. So ignoring the difficult history of the United States, I think, is a mistake, especially in the South. And of course, we're seeing now the result of just pretending there were no difficulties in race relations, and Native Americans are fine. There aren't that many of them anyway. That kind of thinking is very mistaken in my belief. So.
Indeed it is. And I wanted to say your book is a very rich narration. And like you said, it's all about history. It's the history of the country, or like you said, the South, North Carolina and all the other states in the South. Maybe not all of, but you know what I mean. Most of them, which were, let's put it that way, which were forced or meant to or decided to oppose the North. Let's put it that way. And you have also the history of the people, of the characters, which is also very rich. And like you said, it is interwoven in the country or with the country.
Yes. I wanted to say something about, kind of the big picture of where I live, through the example of the very tiny particular details and the spiritual quality of place, the quality of the rural South that is so captivating to so many of us, and yet which the beauty of which hides difficult history for many people. So,
And may I also ask, when you named your one main character, Randolph Jefferson Lee? So, I mean, of course, one person came to mind when I read his full name. So Robert E. Lee came to mind. So was that the idea behind naming him?
Well, I'm playing a game with naming. And as you might have noticed, one of the lovely darlings that I cut was his backstory. He really doesn't have a relationship to that Civil War Confederate general, but he likes to pretend he does just to make people crazy. So he's cantankerous and contrary. So as one of the things I'm doing also is playing with language and who's in charge of language, right? Who's in charge of the story? And so because I'm working in the American English language-based publishing industry with what I have to say, I'm not telling my story in oral history. I made sure that this idea is shown on the very front cover. So the term Indigo Field, it becomes clear, is a name that hides the truth.
Yeah.
And so with I'm playing kind of fun little game. So Miss Reba's name, of course, is not actually Miss Reba. She was kind of renamed by her sister, and in a kind of fun sisterly way. But she has a secret name. She has several secret names, and so those things are revealed in backstory, just the way an emotional connection to history is revealed throughout the story. And so, I had so much fun with that. In fact, I have a friend who's from the Saponi band of the Occaneechi Nation, and he read Indigo Field, and he came running up to me and he said, it's a trickster book. And I said, yes, I was playing tricks and I wouldn't have thought of it that way. But he's an expert on kind of the trickster stories of Native people, and he's writing a book about that. So I was very honored that he saw that and lifted that up. So, yeah.
Okay. And
so a trickster,
yeah. Sorry,
a trickster, is there are intentional trickster elements in the story because I'm paying homage to indigenous people and their stories. And so there's a little dog who embodies the spirits that are protecting the field, and he creates all kinds of trouble. So,
and I also wanted to ask you about the tribe you mentioned in your book, because I've never heard about this tribe, I have to be honest. And I looked it up and I found it most interesting. What can you tell us? Can you tell us a little bit more about this connection with the indigenous people in your book?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. First of all, the Tuscarora. The Tuscarora were around the 15, 16, 1700s, the most powerful tribe in nation in the central and eastern part of North Carolina. They controlled trading routes. Mm-hmm. They were fierce warriors. You just didn't mess with the Tuscarora people. They had an Iroquoian language, but they were only part of what has been documented as at least 20 distinct nations with distinct languages of indigenous people who lived east of the mountains where the Cherokee held land. So I became fascinated with this because I was reading primary sources for a different project and realized how many indigenous people there were that I knew nothing about, as you say. So back to the Tuscarora, they took a lead in resisting settlers and English settlers and Palatine settlers in the village of New Bern, a very early settlement in 1700s. And they rose up against the village of New Bern and slaughtered them all. Now, you might think, well, that was a mean thing to do. But to get into the background, the English people had been doing many things we've all heard of that made life for Tuscarora people difficult. But the main thing, the most horrible thing they were doing was stealing their children in the woods and selling them in the slave markets of Charleston, South Carolina, to the fields, the sugarcane fields in Barbados. So this was a horror for Tuscarora people. It would be a horror for any parent. Yeah. There's documentation that the Native people, the culture across the board was very fond of children. Children were central to that world. So there were repercussions after they attacked. And of course, English people came, soldiers came, and fractured most of the nations. The war spread to South Carolina. And by the time the 1750s came around, the whole village culture of every one of those nations had changed dramatically. The Tuscarora, being canny people, made deals. They made deals with a similar Iroquois nation in upstate New York, and many of them migrated to upstate New York. Some of them were kept made deals to live on their land in reservations. So all these things I had never heard of before, and I was fascinated by it. And I also discovered that as late as 1751, Tuscarora people were living in roving bands in my rural county, in some of the early towns there. So I live on a farm so there's still Tuscarora people in North Carolina. And that's part of the point of the book. There's still people from many of the nations. I meet them all the time. Whenever I give talks, I just was out on the coast at a bookstore, and sat down with a Hatteras Tuscarora novelist, and we talked, and I learned about his book. His name is Greyhawk, and so I just wanted to lift that up. And part of it is that I was a newcomer to the South about 35 years ago, and I fell in love with it. And one of the things I fell in love with was that where I was living with my new husband was a family farm that was just strewn with artifacts of Native origin, stone tools from the woodland era, arrowheads. My husband has an eye for these things. So the family had collected these things over 100-year period. And the mystery so I studied history, and the story was, most historians had concluded they disappeared, but the details are very different. Mm-hmm. They didn't disappear, they're still here. So there was actually a very powerful indigenous identity, tribal identity movement in North Carolina and throughout the South, trying to get recognition through cultural events, powwows, writing up of the story. And I really applaud that, so it's quite fascinating to me.
I wanted to ask you, all the characters in your book, I got the feeling it's not just two main characters, but what we like to call we call it an ensemble cast, most definitely, because you have more characters there. And my question would be, did the characters find you, or did you find the characters?
Oh, well, it's not that simple now, Miss Edith, Miss Teacup. One of the characters found me. And this happens to me sometimes when I'm writing fiction. I'll see a stranger, and there's something about them that speaks to me and sparks imagination. So the Colonel was generated from an experience I had walking my dog down this rural farm road where nobody came except people with pickup trucks, and you could stop and talk to your neighbors because there wasn't much traffic. And one day, this day I was walking my dog, there was a stranger, running, jogging down the road. And he was an older man. He had a brush cut, kind of military looking, and he had all the regalia, the special shoes. And this was 30 years ago, and people just didn't dress like that. It hadn't come to my part of the South. I mean, I was from a city, so I certainly knew what a jogger was, what running was, but it was strange. It took me a minute, and I realized, well, he's probably from that retirement facility across the highway, the village, upscale village. Yes, there was a village across the highway from me. And I thought, okay, just as I was kind of saying, okay, now I can place this person. That's when he turned and looked at me, and he had this look of utter devastation on his face. So here's a complete stranger looking at me that way. He kept going. I kept going, but it hurt my heart. I thought, what in the world is going on? This happens to fiction writers. I think sometimes we have, these empathy bursts where we can't help but be struck by the emotions in a stranger that we're observing. And so I had been writing fiction, short stories. I just won a few awards, and I was feeling very, full of myself. And I was walking with a friend a few days later, and I told her, I told her about this man. I said, I'm going to write a novel about him. So that was hubris. I'd never written a novel before. I had tried. The other characters came to me while thinking of really what I wanted to do overall with the story. I was a community activist. I was involved in the environmental community. I was involved in the farmers market. I was involved in the arts community. I knew I had a church, an activist church that I was working with, and I was meeting people. Very interesting. The church where I went had elderly African-American members. This is unusual in the South. They were traditionally from families who had attended that church since slavery times. And all of that just, I just began to get a sense of the whole community where I was. I was in love with it. I loved the small town. I was tired of city life. I loved the beauty, and I loved how the different communities fit together like a puzzle piece to make a whole. And yet people were still mostly in their bubble worlds. So I wanted to say something about that. I had been thinking about writing short stories about a woman who was had a goat dairy. I knew some people who had goat dairies, and that was really interesting to me. I had been thinking about writing about when I wrote about this goat dairy farmer, I wrote her backstory, and Miss Reba showed up in her backstory as the midwife for Bobo. So I have a whole 100-page novella published in a short story collection about Jolene growing up, getting married, giving birth to Bobo, connecting with the land, and so on. So Miss Reba showed up as this kind of very mysterious woman of few words. But as I began to do some of the work I was doing in my community, really fed my awareness of the Black community and the history there. I became an activist for Black history after I learned that nobody in my town really knew who the local middle school was named for that my daughter was going to. And what's that? And it was partly because it had a sort of a vague name, Horton Middle School. And then I did a little, walk around research, and my Black friends knew who the school was named for, but my white friends did not, even those who had grown up and lived here forever. So that's when I learned that what Black people know about history and what white people know about history in this country, especially in the South, are two different things. And that Black Americans often have reasons to not tell their story. So I became mentored by some older Black women in my community as I began to speak and learn about this character. He was an enslaved man who sold his poems to buy his freedom. So that's not really part of the story, but my awareness and my activism in that area brought me an awareness that I really wanted to fold in to this story. And in those days, people whispered about lynchings or whispered about the name of the school, but they didn't speak openly about it the way they do more now. Things have changed a little bit. So all of that was part of folding in the indigenous history and the Black stories that were untold by Miss Reba and her family.
And sorry, go on.
Trying to get a complete picture of the history, you'd have to talk to all these different people because it's like puzzle pieces fitting together. And if you only talk to maybe white people, only Black people, or indigenous, it's always a different part, but it actually interconnects in the end.
Yes, they're interlocking puzzle pieces, just as you see, and they fit tightly together. Often there are really great connections. People work together in certain contexts and so on, but there's something held back. And I, as a newcomer, I wanted to understand the South. I also was a copy editor for this great Southern publisher, Algonquin Books of Chapel Hill, which was publishing new contemporary Southern writers. And I read their books. I became fascinated with Southern fiction, and I started really learning, reading it like crazy. And I started, just really wanting to be a person who could tell a story like that. So I was very ambitious and it was really kind of a baptism for me into Southern storytellers and Southern identity and community identity to write this novel.
And do you think it was easier for you to find these things out as a newcomer?
Yes, I do. And I have a certain charm where I can walk into a room and say, what's going on here? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And whereas when you live in a community, a rural community, pretty much anywhere or a place that has a long-standing families, kind of structure in place, people remember the past and they do talk about it amongst themselves, and they remember who insulted whom, and who cheated whom. And I learned much later that there actually are some stories like that in my husband's family, and people remember the times when someone was unnecessarily cruel, and so those people get kind of rigidly set in place in their identities, and in not feuds exactly, but in, okay, don't hang out with those guys. They're all like this, right? So their prejudices are entrenched, whereas, I had come from a very diverse city, and I was in love with everybody. I just wanted to talk to everybody. My farmer neighbors, my elderly Black church ladies, my teacher friends, artists, writers, river festival people. I was in love with it all, and I wanted to understand it. And so I guess I used my empathic powers and powers of observation as a former journalist to see the big picture. And I do think that separation that I had from being in any one of those groups gave me the naivete and the innocent pleasure in opening up to different kinds of people, where that might be hard for somebody who's in it, who's in the soup and has been in the cultural soup in their own identity for so long.
So you put together the puzzle pieces, and in your story, I'm wondering, is Miss Reba the person who puts together all the puzzle pieces? Because she is part of a community, and yet in her own community, he's an oddball. People look at her suspiciously because of her background, because of her connection with the indigenous people, because, like you said, those statues she has in her field, and which are regarded as heathen monuments or something like that, and she puts the people together. In the end, she's the one that is the center point where people come together, isn't she, in a way?
Yes, she is the field in a way. So that's a really great insight. I do think that her life, her inner healing, her process of healing from all of the difficulties in her life, present and past, is the energy that reclaims the field. And she includes, one of the things I really loved about writing this, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but let's just say there are reversals of fortune, and that's a really fun structure to play with when you're dealing with class and race. So, but the surprise of it, I think, is really fun, and the fact that the field itself connects people over time, and even though horrific things have happened there, in the end, it's a place of healing. So,
And what about that. Lucy? She is not an easy character.
No.
She's an interesting character, and I was fascinated by her because all the knowledge she has and the way she communicates with the spiritual world in her past and in the present of the book, she's always there. Is she the past of the field, whereas Reba is the present and maybe even the future? Or do we have another future in another character? I'm not giving anything. I don't want to give anything away. Just asking.
Just a hint.
Just asking.
Well, let's see. Old Lucy, otherwise known as Tuscarora Lucy, and she is this hermit lady who lives on an island in the field when Miss Reba, many, many years ago, in the 20s and 30s, is growing up with her big sister Sheba, and they go running around and trying to find this rhubarb hermit lady, who they do find eventually, and they become kind of mentored by her, or cherished by her, and they learn a lot from her. So, but she also has, in the current story, she's long dead, but she has spiritual presence, and she, I'm playing in a way with how people culturally see each other. I'm trying to play against stereotype. So every character in the story has a voice in their ear, and we could interpret it as a spirit, or we could interpret it as memory, or just as what happens to all of us when we're having inner conversations. So yeah, old Lucy has become the voice in the ear of Miss Reba, telling her, promoting the idea of revenge, because she has a lot to feel vengeful about. And as far as the future spirit, I think maybe Danielle is the future spirit, the most recent of Miss Reba's dead relations, the most recent tragedy. But Danielle, when she comes back, I think I can give this away. Danielle is the murdered child that we were reading about. There was a court case about the murder. And she was a young woman, but she had been raised by Miss Reba. So she comes back as a little girl. And this little girl, over time, asks for the stories of the field and nudges Miss Reba toward confronting her past, and always wanted people to live in the field like in the old days. And so she has this kind of astonishingly warm and kind presence. I haven't known people that amazing but a few times in my life, but she is a person who wants to bring people together. So her spirit, I think, is the spirit of the future.
And a healing spirit.
Exactly, and the healing spirit, whereas Lucy is all revenge and gets back for what it did to me, to us, to our people. Yeah. And Danielle is the complete opposite. She's the healing one. And I think it is also a bit reflected what she did, or the person she was, in the way TJ was brought up. Although, I mean, I think he's also, for me, in the end of the book, it turns out, I think he's going to become a very important part in the way people live. Not sorry if I go away, but I think he's important.
It's okay with me if you interpret that, what the future might be. You just maybe not the final scene, but I love TJ. He showed up just kind of out of the blue. I mean, he's just a little bit of a trickster himself. He's 14-year-old white boy, son of the murderer, who through various, tricks, ends up being a boarder in Miss Reba's house, and she doesn't like him being there. But he also was raised by Danielle, and they have her in common. So, but he's a 14-year-old white boy, and he's just, so ignorant about the world. He was raised in a very small world, in a difficult world. And I think he, he's the kind of kid who loves Mound's candy bars, but and hates coconut, and doesn't know that Mound's candy bars are made out of coconut. So he's like goofy dumb in that way that teenagers can be, especially those who were raised in very limited circumstances. And he sneaks out on the porch roof and listens to the stories that Miss Reba tells out loud. And I do think he falls in love with those stories, and he wants to learn more about old Lucy, and he goes looking for her, tries to write. I love this part. I just have to say, I mean, you're not supposed to say that you really love your own writing, but there's this scene where he cracks me up. He's supposed to write about a hero in history, and he picks old Lucy, who's somebody who, is not famous. She lived a secret hermetic life, but he's heard about her stories, and he likes that she's, powerful and vengeful, and he likes that she makes moonshine,
Yeah.
hard liquor, that's fun. I want to try that, and so he goes looking for her. And of course he finds some evidence of her that I won't get into. But yeah, I think they all have a future of possibilities, and I think he does too by the end. Because his world gets bigger.
Yeah, because he is not a mean character. He's, like you said, he was brought up in limited circumstances, and he had a good role model in Danielle.
Yes,
and
right.
He's actually a nice boy. I mean, the way he acts towards Bobo and the animals, and he's not the mean white boy.
Right. So I wanted him to be surprising. And, also connected to the Black world through his mama Danny, and he is, he's got some PTSD and he's got all kinds of prejudices. But he was the witness to the murder of his beloved mama Danny. And, he's the one who didn't show up to tell the story in order to convict his father. So, that's a big thread in the story as well.
You had a question for a guest you were wondering about, because I read in the afterword of the book that you had this huge first draft and you had to cut it down. And Teacup, you were wondering,
how did you do that? Because I guess it always hurts to take something out, but such a huge amount. Or, as you mentioned, do you use parts taken out as short stories? Otherwise?
Well, I have pulled some pieces that I think would make good short stories. I had a chapter that was Miss Reba's love life. And I won't say what it was, but I'm hoping to publish that as a short story. She had a somewhat disastrous love life, I'll just say that. But it was, fun and interesting and so much fun to write. I also had another character who was a man who was always standing by the side of the road, holding a Bible in his arms and walking or hitchhiking to the gas station to get a loaf of bread. So he was a character that had to me, a really important part of the story. But when I took him away, other things became more clear. So I learned how to do that. I'm in a writing group. I had really good advice from, shout out to Karen Pullen. Don't mean for everybody to call you up, but Karen is a murder mystery writer, and she knew about story structure, and she really helped me with that. I had at one point, I wanted, the vision of the book was to have all the seasons in the farmer's market year. I was selling at a farmer's market, and my husband's the grower. And I knew, when you plant from seed, and I wanted to put in the different moons, that Tuscarora names for the moons for different times of year. But I just went down. That was just way too much. A more compressed time was much better. So I took out a lot of that sort of thing. And there was a whole storyline in the farmer's market with various festivals and kind of a Greek chorus of farmers. I ended up just having the Greek chorus of the boys at the Sunrise Grill, as the kind of Greek chorus. So those are the kinds of things I took out. I had a whole section about how to make goat cheese, because damn it, I learned how to make goat cheese. And I wanted to show it off a little, and it was a great scene, but man, it's just not as dramatic as it could have been, and I didn't need it. So Jolene's story became smaller in order to raise up the contrasting stories of Miss Reba and the Colonel.
And since you were talking about goat cheese, we learn, we learn a little bit about animals in your book. And since before we started the recording, the listeners, we saw your furry overlord behind you. So I'm wondering, does he also make an appearance in disguise in your book?
I'm not sure what the furry overlord is.
Your dog.
Oh, my dog. Oh. Well, I have a made-up dog in the book, and he's really rambunctious and small and cute. But that dog was generated by some historical research into the idea of the Carolina dog, which was a kind of dog common at the firesides of indigenous people in North and South Carolina. So there's a whole, Carolina Dog Association and so on. So my dog doesn't show up per se, but I'm a dog person. And so I love dog behavior, and my dog is mischievous. So yeah, maybe some of that kind of slides into this mischievous puppy in the field.
See,
yes,
that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, see now.
Yeah, you can't deny it.
I can't.
There's no way for you to deny that. Absolutely not. Marjorie, what would be your advice for any other aspiring author out there?
My top advice is to find a writing community. Find a good workshop, a workshop where you're respected as a person and as a striving artist, and to look around the room when you do take a workshop and say, that person's a better writer than me, but I have a lot to learn from him or her. I'm going to make sure we go out for coffee and do what I can to support the writers in my life. And if you feel like your work has an affinity with another writer, people talk a lot about, this whole Ernest Hemingway story. I talk about this with my students, where Ernest Hemingway, he always said, sit in a chair every day and get your writing done, no distractions. And that is not what he did. That's not what he did at all. Ernest Hemingway, he had critique, he had a writing group, he had Gertrude Stein in Paris, he had Sherwood Anderson, he had a great editor, and he had peers. He had Fitzgerald, he had all kinds of peers who commented on his work. And what Hemingway did is in his later years, he would party for 9 months of the year and take notes, travel and party, Spain, bullfighting, whatever, out on the boat in the Keys. And then he would go and sit for 3 months, 6 months and draft. And he would kind of, stop drinking and partying, and he would be very serious. And the one thing that's true about his advice is that you do need, I think it's very helpful to a writer to have a daily practice during a time when they're drafting something new, because that way the subconscious can work on your work at night. And depending on what time of day you work, when you pick it back up again, your subconscious has been working on it for you. And your memory can hold the material and then project forward what's next much more easily. And you can have the peace and quiet in order to go into the trance that we all go into when we're creating something new and we don't know where it's coming from, but we really need to sit there and listen, or, it's going to go away. Yep. Whatever you want to call it, the muse, the trance, the creative process. So, so those are two pieces of advice. Find a writing community that's supportive. You will need those people later to celebrate with when you publish your book.
That's a good point. Absolutely good point.
And I've been very fortunate that I've had a lot of great workshops, and I've kept in touch with just a few of my writer friends over the years. And it's made all the difference. What we're making is more than just art on the page. We're making a community whenever we're in a community of readers, hopefully, all over your Facebook, Twitter,
exactly.
Instagram.
Yep.
and a community of peers who can understand the kinds of things that you maybe can't talk about with your spouse, kind of strange things that come up in the creative process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or in the publishing process.
Yeah. And after we talked about your post-it notes on your door and on your board, are you a planner or a pantser or a planter?
Oh man, a little bit of both, but mostly a pantser, I admit it. And then, I come back and say, well, you don't know where this is going. You better figure it out. Let's come up with a structure. Structure is one of the hardest things. I was very ambitious with this novel to come up with a big, shaggy, community, multi-voice novel. I had a hard time figuring out what one person was doing while another person was on stage, and so that I came into the planning process. What might be surprising is that I wrote the climactic scenes first. I knew I was going to that climax, and so I had to build the characters to have a reason to go towards that surprising climax that I won't say what it is.
No. Interesting.
It's really hard not to, but it came to me. Mm-hmm. It was a gift. The climax was a gift, and each of the character has a part in it. And so I had to go back and see why the character that I was just kind of sensing and feeling with empathy and imagination, why they logically would end up in that particular climax.
Why did
I made charts.
Yeah,
I made charts. I want to tell you one thing about my charts. One of the things I did was I created story arc charts and time charts and metaphor arcs. And I even objects in the story often have, like there are lots of birds and parrots in the story. There are also objects that have a story arc. For example, there are two tables in the beginning of the story. One is kind of a rough table made by the colonel's brother, and one is a very fine antique English Tudor table from Anne's family. And these tables each have an opening description, development, backstory, and a resolution. And I just loved playing with that. So I did that. I created a lot of density with objects, with the physical reality. And since it took me so long to write this, I had time to do that.
Would you say that the objects also have a spirit in a way?
I feel like they may, I think in the climax scene, you kind of get a sense that there's some presiding spirits within those two tables that kind of are part of not just the mind of the character, but part of the presence of the spirit world, which is so prominent in the story.
And since this narration was such a rich and full of interesting characters and backstories, developments, what are your future plans? What can we expect from you?
What can you expect from me? Oh my gosh. I have a story I've been wanting to work on about women artists in Rome. I've researched it. I have boxes of research on it. I have written some material, and it's what I really have been wanting to do for a long time when I get the chance. But the more I tour with Indigo Field, and the more people ask me questions, and what's going to happen next, and who's doing this, and what really happened before, I'm like, maybe I need to go back to this at some point. And yes, so I am looking forward to a writing retreat. That's one of my strategies as well in early part of next year, where I will be drafting a new story, and I'm not sure which kind of story it will be.
Maybe in Italy, Rome.
Maybe something completely different.
Maybe something completely different.
Who knows?
Right. Yes.
So, Marjorie, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Oh my goodness. I'd like them to know that I love to Zoom with book clubs, and I'm in the process. I just heard the voice actor for the audiobook. So that will be coming out, I think, later this year. So people can contact me at my website, which is just my name, www.marjoriehudson.com, and request some kind of book club conversation, because as you can see, it's so much fun for me to talk about these characters that have been living in my head as my imaginary friends for a long time.
Oh. Anything else?
Well, I just loved writing this book, and it was a struggle. So if you are a writer, don't shy away from a struggle. Set something aside and come back to it. Learn more, come back to it. And you may find that I really feel like I finally did what I needed to do to complete the book. So.
And dear listeners, you should read the book. It's a fantastic read, a fascinating read, and you will not regret it. Absolutely worth your time. Pick up.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Marjorie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Lovely to be here. You guys are a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. So were you. You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.